But first, pleased to welcome a very special guest. So fans of Knicks Film School probably know this person. If you've ever been on a halftime Zoom, shout out to the newsletter subscribers, you definitely know this person. And if you've been on a town hall, which we just had a good one the other day, you certainly know this individual. I will explain why he is here in a moment, but suffice it to say, he is a personal inspiration of mine. He's been a big help of mine along the way. I don't know any accomplished journalists. He is the most accomplished journalist I know. He spent a lifetime and a half at the Dayton Daily News, along with several other publications, Fulbright Fellow, former president of the Society of Professional Journalists. I could go on and on about his resume, but I don't want to get him red in the face. So, Mr. Ray Marcano, hello, sir.
How you doing, Jonathan? How are you, John? How's it going? What's happening? What's doing? Shaking.
What's shaking?
Question for you. This is just not for now. This will be for another one of your podcasts. But what is likely to happen first? Donovan Mitchell trade or a Joey Gallo base hit?
So here's what I know about baseball. I know that you get up about 4 times a day, and I know that you play about every day. So without knowing much about Mr. Gallo or his current stature within the Yankees and how he's doing, I'm assuming from the tone of your question, he's not doing well.
Well, he's with Los Angeles now. That's how well he's doing.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Gotcha. So I'm gonna go with a Gallo base hit. How about that?
A Gallo base hit?
Yes, before Donovan Mitchell trade.
I don't know.
I'll put it this way. I think the foliage will start to turn before we get a Donovan Mitchell trade. So, take that for what it's worth. So you were kind enough to agree to come on here for a few minutes because, as I stated already, today's episode is a draft of all of the number 2 picks in the history of the sport. And spoiler alert, the first pick in this draft is going to be, sad to say, but now the late great Bill Russell, of course, was pick number 2 a very, very, very long time ago. And after that, he went on to have one of the greatest careers in team professional sports history, in addition to making quite an impact off the court. And you are someone who, I think when we first met, you were on the ground doing stuff for CNN for, a couple summers ago when the nation was turning on its head. So you have a little bit of experience with this sort of thing, which is why I wanted you to come on. So yeah, I guess we could start there. Like when I say the name Bill Russell, like what comes to your mind?
Well, what comes to my mind is not what comes to most people's mind. What comes to my mind is the impact he had on civil rights and equality. What comes to most people's mind is that he's the most dominant professional basketball force in the history of the game. There's been nobody like him since. I know people will look at Shaq and Wilt Chamberlain and say, well, what about those guys? Not even close. Bill Russell could dominate and alter a game just by getting under the basket and jumping. But he was, very misunderstood and very quiet. And I think that's why a lot of his achievements and a number of the things that he did on and off the court in order to promote equality gets lost.
When we talk about an athlete who, like Russell, was, before I even ask this question, let me ask you first. Would you, because when I think of the most tumultuous time to be a black person in this country, I think of it's in terms of the civil rights era, right? In terms of the civil rights movement, it was late 50s, 60s, early 70s. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yeah, I'd say from early 60s through the late 60s. Yes.
So his playing career started in the mid 50s and lasted until 1969. And so he was right in the thick of that. So I think what I'm curious about is when you look at black athletes throughout the history of this country, and in terms of their impact, when someone was playing during that time period, does that kind of, like, what does that say to you about, and they were a person of stature, received a lot of attention, and in Russell's case, played in a place that historically has, I mean, I don't know how, has not been kind to black athletes. Like, what does that mean when you talk about him as a professional athlete?
Yeah, Boston still isn't kind today. So
no.
I think to answer that question, put what he did in context. So first of all, when he was at the University of San Francisco, I think 54 to 56.
Yep.
As you might imagine, a lot of the frat boys there did not quite care for him to be there, and said and did a number of vile things. Fast forward, to him being with the Boston Celtics. He's still a young player in 1961, and this is where I get to Russell as being not only a dominant force on the court, but a dominant force off the court, and how quietly he did that. So 1961, the NBA is still pretty much a nascent league, and they're trying to build their brand. So they say, hey, let's St. Louis Hawks, let's go to Lexington, Kentucky. We'll have a game there. We'll try to get fans interested. So they get to Lexington. They get to their hotel, and they go down to the diner to eat. And the diner says, I'm sorry, we're not serving black people. So Russell is a young Bill Russell, right? He gathers his black teammates on the Boston Celtics and says, look, I don't think we should play this game. And they agreed. Not only that, the black players on St. Louis agreed not to play the game as well. So that NBA game, which was supposed to introduce people to this new sport that everybody thought was exciting, was played before a very small crowd and an all-white team. And it was all because Bill Russell stood up and said, look, no, if you're not going to treat me like a man, I'm not going to be involved in what you do. Quite that simple.
And obviously this was, around the time when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were both coming up to rise to prominence. When you think about the choices that, again, prominent black individuals in this country had to make at that time in terms of which of those two paths predominant, and I think one had, and you could speak to this a lot more than I can, Malcolm had a lot of influence on Martin, and Martin had a lot of influence on Malcolm, but and vice versa. But when you think of the path that a professional athlete had to choose back then, how do you imagine you're back then during those times? Like, what do you think was going through Russell's head in terms of like, I could go this route or I could go that route? And what do you think of the choices he made?
Well, we know what was going through his head because he wrote about it and he spoke about it. So there was a reason that he was considered to be surly and sullen. And it was because in Boston, for example, he refused to do things like sign autographs for kids, or sign basketball for adults, or sign his picture and send it to somebody from their birthday. Why was he against that? Because in his mind, he said, I am not interested in your cheers and adulation. I am far more interested in you treating me and everybody like me with dignity, respect, and equality. And until you can do that, I'm just not interested in playing your game. So we knew that was Bill Russell. We also know in 1963, he was asked whether or not, remember 1963, he is in the midst of his greatness. I mean,
sure.
He's just dominating the game back then. And a reporter asked him, if you could, would you give up basketball to fight for the civil rights movement? He said, absolutely. If I think I could make a real significant difference, I would give this up tomorrow. And that shocked a lot of people. And then, remember, and here's, a really abhorrent example that actually shows this guy's dignity and character. It's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. I think it was in the mid 60s. And forgive me.
He was still playing at this time.
He was still playing. Might have been 66. His house in Massachusetts was broken into and vandalized. Not only did they write graffitis on the wall and bust up all of his trophies, somebody actually shit on his bed, went into his house and shit on his bed. That's all in his books. It's all documented. Nobody's making that stuff up. It happened. But Bill Russell, being Bill Russell, didn't let any of that stuff deter. He figured that in his own way, quietly, with that sort of dignity, he needed to do everything that he could do to make sure that that didn't happen to generations that came after.
And so he retires in 1969, of course, winning a championship, going through our beloved New York Knicks on his way to winning his last championship. There wasn't anybody that he didn't beat. That's often repeatedly.
He beat everybody.
He beat him soundly at that. So on his last legs, he beats the Knicks. He goes off into the sunset. Can you maybe give a little bit of context as far as, so again, but 1969. So it's a year after Dr. King is assassinated, correct? So we're still in the thick of this in the country. What kind of life did he lead, immediately after? And then, he didn't have to deal with basketball as a player anymore.
Same thing. Again, he went after, he addressed equality and civil rights issues very quietly. I think that most people understand his career. They understand that he went back and he coached a couple of teams, didn't do very well. He became a color commentator on ABC, I believe, right after his playing days were over. But really, the rest of his time when it comes to activism is what I call quiet activism. Now, everybody remembers Jackie Robinson, right? Because he was
sure.
Thick of it. He can't but remember Jackie Robinson. Everybody remembers Muhammad Ali and Jim Brown because they were both of those guys were far more vocal. And Brown still is one.
Sure.
But not Bill Russell, far quieter. There's another example of how that manifests itself during all the Colin Kaepernick stuff after Kaepernick was kneeling, and other sports figures began to do that as well. Bill Russell did not call a press conference. He didn't call people to tell them how he thought. He put a simple message on Twitter in which he got on his knee and raised his arm and fist and simply said, "You're not alone." Something that is as simple as that, in many ways, speaks far louder than anything he could have actually said. And that was what he did.
It still doesn't really hit me that he's gone, because it's like from the moment I started watching sports, it's like, oh, it's Bill Russell is the guy who won all those championships with the Celtics. But so it's strange that he's not going to be around anymore, even though he, by all accounts, I guess lived the life that he could be proud of. I hope, I guess the last thing, what do you think, in your opinion, the NBA should do anything to honor him that hasn't already been? I mean, obviously they have the finals trophy named after him. Like, there's been some talk about retiring number 6, that nobody should wear that again. Is that something you'd be in favor of?
Absolutely. There are very few across all sports. There are a lot of great players. There are a lot of people who do great things off the court, but each sport, you can count icons professionally and personally on one hand across all the sports. Jackie Robinson's an icon. Walter Payton is an icon. And Bill Russell is an icon. When you have icons like that, not only should they retire his number 6 across the entirety of the NBA, but they should follow baseball's example and have, Bill Russell Day, which they not only every season, in which they not only.
It's a great idea.
And for me, talking about his accomplishments on the court is the least of what they should do. Sure, they should mention it, but they should tell the public and remind the public the kind of man he was and what he meant for civil rights and equality in America, because to me, that's far more important than anything that he could do in all his accomplishments on the basketball court.